Hello everybody, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Educating Adventures. We know that the world is covered by beautiful ecosystems that are filled with plants, animals, fungi, and all these organisms work together to keep each ecosystem balanced and healthy. But what would happen if an organism got to that ecosystem that wasn't supposed to be there? Well, this does happen. We call these organisms invasive species, and that's exactly what we're learning about today. Let's get started. An invasive species is any organism that has been introduced to an area that it is not native to. Plants, animals, fungi, they can all be invasive species, but today we're going to focus mostly on animals. Invasive species typically cause problems in the areas that they have been introduced to, and we're going to talk about some of those problems in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about how invasive species even get to these new places. Invasive species can be introduced to new places both on purpose and on accident. And we don't always know exactly how they got to these new places, but we can often make pretty good hypotheses. Let's start with an invasive species that was introduced on purpose. Cane toads are native to Central and South America, but they were introduced to Australia and many other places well over 50 years ago on purpose to help control a population of cane beetles. In some parts of Australia, they had these big sugarcane plantations, and these cane beetles were eating the crops. So to protect the crops, scientists introduced these cane toads, but unfortunately, cane toads are not picky eaters. They ate tons of native species, they outcompeted native toads, and they didn't have very many predators because they're poisonous. Today, cane toads are still a big problem in Australia and in many other places. Now let's jump to an animal that was introduced on accident. Burmese pythons are native to Asia, and this very large snake has been introduced to Florida. Now, scientists aren't positive about how this happened, but we have a couple hypotheses. Scientists think that because Burmese pythons are a pretty popular pet, but they're pretty hard to care for, that many pet owners probably released their snakes into the wild when they could no longer care for it. In addition to that, Florida gets hit by some pretty big storms, and scientists hypothesize that some hurricanes that destroyed breeding centers released tons of snakes into the environment. Because Florida was a great habitat for them, it had lots of food and very few predators, the population of Burmese pythons was able to grow and is still a big problem today. Now that we understand a little bit more about how invasive species get to new places, let's talk more about the problems they create once they get there. The first problem that we're going to discuss is how invasive species often feed on native species and can really damage their populations. And a great example of this is the brown tree snake. Brown tree snakes are native to Australia and many of the surrounding islands, but they were introduced to the very small island of Guam many years ago on accident. Scientists hypothesize that brown tree snakes probably stowed away on a cargo ship and were accidentally introduced to Guam. Now, prior to their arrival, native birds and reptiles, some of which are only found on Guam, they thrived. They had very few natural predators. There was lots of food available for them. But after the brown tree snakes arrived, they fed really heavily on the native species. Since their arrival, many species of birds that are only found on Guam have become endangered, and some have even become extinct. Another problem that invasive species present is that they outcompete native species. And what I mean by this is they might be bigger or stronger or faster, and they're able to catch and eat food that would otherwise belong to native species. A great example of this is the American bullfrog. American bullfrogs are native to the eastern United States, but they were introduced to the western United States both for food and to help control populations of insects and other pests. This is a really large frog. American bullfrogs are much larger than the rest of the frogs and other amphibians that we have in the western United States. Because of this, they ate a lot of food really fast, food that would otherwise belong to the native amphibians, and because of that, the population size of native amphibians has gone down, while the population size of American bullfrogs has gone up. Some invasive species are a problem because they physically change the environment where they have been introduced. A great example of this are nutrias. Nutrias are a large rodent. They kind of look like beavers. They're semi-aquatic and they are native to the wetlands of South America. They have been introduced to many continents because of the demand for their fur in the fur trade, but today they kind of just live all over the place in wetlands where they're not supposed to be. Wetlands rely really heavily on the aquatic plants that grow in and around the water. The roots of those plants hold the soil in place and keep the wetland stable. Nutrias feed really heavily on all of these aquatic plants, and by doing that, they remove everything that's holding the soil in place. Because of this, entire wetland ecosystems can collapse when we have too many nutrias in the area. For many invasive species, their populations can grow and grow and grow because there may not be any predators in that new area that can actually feed on them to control their population size. A great example of this are lionfish. Lionfish are native to the Indo-Pacific, but they have been introduced to the Caribbean. Scientists hypothesize that many lionfish were released by people who had home aquariums that no longer could care for their lionfish. In the Caribbean, there are almost no predators that can feed on lionfish. They have gigantic venomous spines on their back. Because of this, the population of lionfish has been able to grow and grow and grow, which has made the other problems that the lionfish present even worse. Because their population is getting bigger, they are eating more native species and outcompeting more native fish for food. Now that we know it's no secret that invasive species cause big problems in the areas where they have been introduced, we should probably take a look at what in the world scientists are trying to do to help get rid of invasive species or at least stop the problems that they present. There's kind of two major ways that scientists work to get rid of invasive species. The first one we call physical strategies. And all we mean by that is we are physically removing that animal from the ecosystem where it's invasive to. We can do this by hunting or capturing and relocating. Burmese pythons and lionfish are both experiencing physical strategies of removal by collection or hunting to get them out of these new ecosystems. Scientists may also use chemicals to remove invasive species. We can use pesticides to remove small invasive species. One of the most interesting strategies that I've seen with the brown tree snake, scientists dropped poisoned rats down onto the island to bait the snakes to help get rid of them on Guam. Now, it can be really sad to think about how we need to remove these invasive species from the areas where they were introduced. So the best way for us to really tackle the problem of invasive species is to prevent them from getting there to these new places in the first place. And there's a couple ways that you can help with this. When you're traveling, make sure you follow all rules and regulations to make sure that you're not bringing animals or plants or any other invasive species home with you. And in addition to that, if you have a pet that's not native to your area, you have a snake, you have fish, you have a lizard, make sure that if there ever comes a time that you can't care for your pet anymore, you are not releasing it into the wild. You're finding a new home for it instead. All right, you guys, well, thank you so much for joining me today to learn about invasive species. If you would like to test your knowledge about some of the animals we learned about today, be sure to click the link below to check out our website where we've got quizzes, videos, activities, and so much more. And I can't wait to see you next time at our next adventure.